Good evening, and thank you again for joining our informational webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to run through our instructions for interpretation. I will talk through them in English, and then our interpreters will discuss them in Spanish. On screen are the instructions for selecting the language you would like to hear for this webinar today in English or Spanish. There's an option both for transcription in English, where you can click on the meeting controls, live transcript, and show subtitle, or for interpretation to click on the interpretation, which will come up in a minute, and then click the English channel.
Buenas tardes una vez más y gracias por unirse a nosotros. Antes de que empecemos, quiero dar algunas instrucciones en cuanto a la interpretación. Voy a decir yo todas las instrucciones en inglés y luego el intérprete lo dirá en español. En la pantalla van a ver instrucciones que pueden seleccionar el idioma para el webinario, ya sea en inglés o en español. También hay una opción de obtener los transcritos en inglés, la transmisión en vivo con subtítulos. También la interpretación estará disponible, pudiendo elegir también el inglés como canal.
If you have any questions on joining the interpretation channel, please reach out on the chat in Zoom for technical assistance. And we'll be providing that information for folks who are maybe joining a little bit late to the webinar. The purpose of today's informational webinar is to provide a deeper dive on the recommendations included in the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap, and to hear perspectives on the development of this roadmap from members of the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group. We hope that the content and information shared today can be used to inform comments from all of you and the public on the prioritization and implementation of the recommendations included in the roadmap. The next slide will have information on the public comment period. This will be running through 5 p.m. on March 13th, with comment accepted through email to alternatives@cdpr.ca.gov or by mail to the address listed on the screen. Please share your thoughts, concerns, recommendations, suggestions, or comments with the department as DPR and our partners consider next steps on the implementation of recommendations in the roadmap, and as we work together to accelerate a system-wide transition to more sustainable pest management across the states. As I mentioned, this is an informational webinar, and we do hope to have some time for questions at the end. We encourage you to use the question and answer box at the bottom of Zoom to enter questions rather than the chat feature. We may not be able to answer all questions during today's webinar, but we will get to what we can at the end of the presentation. And so with that, we'd like to kick things off by introducing the Director of the Department of Pesticide Regulation, Julie Henderson, who will be leading this webinar today. So welcome and thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Karen, and welcome everyone who has been able to join this evening. Really happy to have you here. So I wanted to start by just talking about why we're accelerating this transition to sustainable pest management. And first, I want to start by recognizing the real progress that has been made in recent decades by many to transition to safer and more sustainable pest management practices. It's also important to recognize that California has a strict regulatory system and robust risk assessment process that protects people and the environment as part of pest management. But there are still chemical tools in use that can cause harm to people and the environment. So we're working to accelerate this expanded system-wide adoption of sustainable pest management to reduce the health and environmental risks associated with pesticide use, particularly in areas that are disproportionately burdened by multiple sources of pollution. And now I'd like to turn it over to Claire Mendelson, Deputy Secretary for Public Policy at Cali, PA, to share a perspective from the agency.
Thank you so much, Julie. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of my boss, Secretary Yana Garcia, and myself, thank you so much for your interest and time here today to learn more about this exciting and important journey we are embarking on here in California. As Julie mentioned and emphasized, over time, we have made progress in identifying safer methods to solve pest problems in our crops, cities, parks and forests, homes and businesses, but not on a system-wide scale. The evolving science about risks and impacts from certain pesticide uses on our health and our environment, which too commonly impacts communities already overburdened by other environmental hazards, point to the importance of accelerating this system-wide shift. So not only is this transition to sustainable pest management necessary to build a healthy and safe California for all, but it's an inspiring opportunity for California to once again lead in paving a sustainable path for our future. The diverse collaboration that went into the making of this roadmap shows that this path is possible to everyone's benefit. Benefits to ecosystem resilience, agricultural sustainability, community well-being, and economic vitality. We don't expect this to be easy, but with a good dose of creativity and innovation, and importantly, ongoing partnership, we can continue the good momentum of the Roadmap's working group to carry their vision into reality. Thank you again for participating in this webinar and for being with us on this exciting journey. Back over to you, Julie.
Thanks so much, Claire. And now I'd like to turn it over to Victoria Hornbacher from the California Department of Food and Agriculture.
Thanks, Julie. I just want to say that at CDFA, we're very proud of the way this working group has come together. Representatives of so many different perspectives on pest management, from academia to public health, urban pest control specialists and farmers came together to reach a consensus on a path forward for the state of California and how to move us to a more sustainable pest management practice. California farmers lead the world in productivity of a wide variety of nutritious food and do so while also protecting human health and the environment. But what you might not know is that much of what CDFA does to support California agriculture starts and is focused in the urban environment. We're pleased that the roadmap builds upon many of the sustainable pest management practices that CDFA has been using as a foundation of our systems approach to pest management in urban and agricultural settings, including a robust exclusion system for invasive pests and diseases, biological control programs, and sterile insect treatment release programs. I just want to say an example of an integrated and sustainable pest management program that worked at CDFA is our cotton pest, the pink bollworm, which was successfully eradicated in California cotton and the nation using SIT, coupled with host-free periods, pheromone meeting disruption, and BT cotton. With that, I just want to say we're very excited to continue to partner with DPR, Cali, PA, and the working group members on this important initiative. Thanks, Julie and Claire.
Thanks very much, Victoria. So now I'd like to start and just say a few words about the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group and the urban subgroup who was a part of it, an incredibly dedicated group who spent almost about 21 months developing the roadmap. We at DPR, along with Cali PA and CDFA, convene the diverse work group to collaborate in developing a roadmap to transition to sustainable pest management, both in urban settings and in agricultural settings. We recognize that as diverse as the work group is, there are many perspectives across California. So we're excited to enter this phase of sharing the roadmap for broader public input on its implementation, including input on the actions that we should prioritize. This same diversity of perspectives and collaborative approach that were key to developing the roadmap will be critical to its successful implementation as well. So the agenda for our webinar this afternoon will begin with an overview of the roadmap development, some key definitions, the North Star and 2050 goals. We'll also talk about keystone actions to advance sustainable pest management in agricultural and urban settings, do a deeper dive on advancing sustainable pest management in both urban and agricultural contexts, and then share some perspectives of work group members who have been a part of this process and roadmap development. So to start, what is sustainable pest management? And I think the key, of course, is that the roadmap builds on and is an evolution of the state's strong integrated pest management foundation. And the additional lenses that are included in this definition of sustainable pest management include really a holistic whole system approach, also building on the integrated pest management foundation, and then looking through 3 sustainability pillars: health and equity, environmental protection, and economic vitality. The North Star is really the future that we're seeking. And this is a future that all members of the work group agreed on, and includes a focus on human health and safety, environmental resilience, agricultural sustainability, community well-being, and economic vitality. And the implementation of these approaches will help steward the state's natural and cultural resources and enable healthy lives for all Californians and an abundant, healthy food supply for future generations. So we have 2 key goals for the roadmap to achieve by 2050. And I'll just note that 2050 can seem way off in the distance. But part of what is important in thinking about that goal is that to really make a system-wide transition across the state of California in urban and agricultural settings really requires a lot of investment and effort and development of alternatives to be able to get to that place. And so the first goal is that by 2050, California has eliminated the use of priority pesticides by transitioning to sustainable pest management practices. And secondly, that by 2050, sustainable pest management has been adopted as the de facto pest management system in California. And again, just want to emphasize that we're talking about a system-wide transition across the state. So want to focus on priority pesticides, which are, of course, a core element of that first 2050 goal. And priority pesticides are a subset of high-risk pesticides. And we define high-risk pesticides as active ingredients or uses that are highly hazardous and or are likely to impact human health or the environment. The work group spent quite a bit of time in developing a process to define what priority pesticides are. And so I just want to spend a minute in talking through the criteria and the process that the roadmap envisions. For criteria for priority pesticides, we want to look at hazard and risk classifications, the availability of alternatives, as well as high-risk pest management situations that may require the use of certain pesticides. And I think what's important to understand about this process of defining priority pesticides is that we're really looking holistically to identify those pesticides that we really want to focus on eliminating, ensuring that there are alternatives in their place. And so the identification process will be by the Department of Pesticide Regulation under the advisement of a multi-stakeholder sustainable pest management priorities advisory committee, along with a public process. And I think this is also key to really looking very comprehensively at the biggest and most concerning risks that are posed by the pesticide use, so that we can ensure that we're focusing state resources on those risks that are greatest. So an orientation to the roadmap. And I want to start with just a note on the work group process and how we achieved consensus. The Sustainable Pest Management Work Group and Urban Subgroup worked together to identify and address a wide range of interests and perspectives. And so while work group members agreed on the North Star, which I defined a few minutes ago, they had at times opposing views about how best to reach that future state. In the end, the work group developed and agreed on this roadmap that all of the members are willing to live with and work with. That doesn't mean that all work group members value all of the recommended goals and actions equally, but it does mean that they all agree as a whole that the roadmap works. And so within the roadmap, there are keystone actions, and those are actions that are urgent and foundationally critical, and that are also complete and interconnected. And I'll just note here that it's really important to understand that the roadmap has to be looked at as a whole in order to achieve this future state of sustainable pest management. It won't work if we focus on just one or two actions. We really have to look at all of them to support the achievement of sustainable pest management. Leverage points are places where sustained and focused effort is needed. And then we have goals for advancing sustainable pest management in both urban and agricultural contexts, as well as goals for advancing sustainable pest management in urban contexts. So I'm going to quickly run through the keystone actions. The first is prioritizing prevention. And to just note here that, of course, if we're preventing pests from establishing, then we don't have to use pesticides. The second keystone action is coordinating state-level leadership. Next keystone action is investing in building sustainable pest management knowledge in both agricultural and urban pest management settings. And I'll just pause here to note that when we convened the work group, we had a group focused on agriculture, as well as a subgroup focused on urban pest management. And often urban pest management has gotten a bit of a short shrift, and it was really important to us to make sure that our focus was comprehensive and looking both at agriculture and at urban pest management. And also just want to flag that in looking at the total amount of pesticide sales in California, we're looking at anywhere between 35 and 50% of pesticide sales being for use in urban contexts. So it's really important that we have an equal focus on managing pests in urban settings. Next keystone action is improving California's pesticide registration and evaluation processes and bringing more alternative products to market. And the last keystone action is enhancing monitoring and data collection. So I'll focus first on actions that apply in both agricultural and urban contexts. The first is updating California's pest prevention, exclusion, and mitigation systems. And here we note that it's very important to look at multiple different levels of prevention, at the state level, at the regional level, and also at the farm scale. So the roadmap establishes goals by 2030, first for the state to coordinate across different levels of government to strengthen biosecurity measures. At the regional level, we want to establish strong regional collaborative processes to prevent, detect, exclude, and mitigate pests at a landscape scale. And at the farm scale, we want all growers to understand their role in detecting and reporting invasive pests. The priority action here is to secure dedicated ongoing funding for CDFA for necessary expertise, infrastructure, and capabilities to intercept, detect, eradicate, and mitigate potential and actual invasive pests, including funding for the high-risk pest exclusion program. Next action is to improve California's pesticide registration and continuous evaluation. And this is really a focus for us at the Department of Pesticide Regulation and focuses on two key areas: new products and existing products. And so the roadmap lays out goals by 2025 for new products to prioritize and expedite lower risk alternative products with clear and transparent scientific review and decision-making processes. And for existing products, we want to evaluate currently registered pesticides, prioritizing the greatest risks to people and the environment, including acute toxicants, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, and developmental and reproductive toxicants, along with impacts to water, air, flora, and fauna. Priority actions include creating mechanisms to expedite reviews of softer chemistries and biologicals while streamlining and improving the overall registration processes, and also to promote development of alternatives to high-risk pesticides. And I just want to pause for a second just to reassure everyone that we are currently at the Department of Pesticide Regulation evaluating and reevaluating pesticides both before and after they're registered. The focus of this particular action in evaluating pesticides is really to look more holistically and comprehensively to prioritize those pesticides that are of the greatest risk so that we can focus on eliminating those and ensuring that we have alternatives in their place. The next action is to strengthen coordinated sustainable pest management leadership. Key goals, and I'll just note that these the roadmap identifies very early action for these goals. And the purpose of that is really to help us really ensure at the state level and at the state and local level, we're coordinating to put this roadmap on its best footing for success. And so the early action by 2024 is for relevant state agencies and departments to have the funding, staffing, and mission to advance the goals of sustainable pest management. We also are focused on strong, coordinated, collaborative, multi-stakeholder bodies at the state and regional levels to advance sustainable pest management in agricultural and urban contexts. The priority action here is to embed sustainable pest management across state agencies to ensure we're all focused in the same direction, enhance the Department of Pesticide Regulation's ability to champion sustainable pest management, and to enhance environmental and health monitoring to track outcomes and roadmap goals. I'll next shift to the focus on advancing sustainable pest management in urban contexts. And I'm going to pause just for a second to turn on my lights. Apologies. The first priority action in the urban setting is to enhance data collection and information for urban pesticide use. And here we want to focus on expanding and funding health and environmental monitoring and data collection to support regulatory decisions. And the key goal is by 2030 to develop and implement systems that provide publicly available urban pesticide use data and information needed for sound regulatory decisions and advancing sustainable pest management. The next key action is advancing research and outreach on urban pest management issues. We want to ensure by 2030 that California research institutions have the infrastructure for urban sustainable pest management research, innovation, and outreach that reflects the volume and impacts of pesticides used in urban context. And I'll just note here, the really important focus on urban is to ensure that we're not just focusing on agricultural pest management, but that the investments really focus on urban pest management as well. And a priority action here is to fund urban sustainable pest management research and outreach at UC's Integrated Pest Management Program, at CSU, and at our community colleges for urban-focused academics, research, and extensions. The next goal is to make sustainable pest management the preferred choice for both licensed and unlicensed users. And here by 2030, we're focused on having systems in place that enable licensees and non-licensees to identify and implement sustainable pest management options that meet their needs. Key priority actions for unlicensed users include identifying and implementing mechanisms to overcome the barriers that prevent widespread adoption of sustainable pest management at school sites. We also want to focus on conducting urban sustainable pest management outreach and requiring retail education, conducting public awareness campaigns, establishing workplace sustainable pest management training, and building positive incentives and opportunities for urban users to increase their adoption of sustainable pest management tools and practices. Priority actions for licensed users include updating criteria for improving continuing education units in sustainable pest management, considering licensure or training requirements for property managers and in-house pesticide applicators based on the type of business and/or of a particular size business. And also for the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the Structural Pest Control Board to establish and promote criteria for sustainable pest management certifications of pest management providers or services. We also want to focus urban design, building codes, and regulations to enhance pest prevention. The key goal here by 2030 is for the state to have its urban design incorporate pest prevention, and that pest prevention is central to pest management training, licensing, standards, and building codes. Priority actions include formalizing general pest inspection requirements, formalizing a PCA license category with training and exams focused on pest inspections of urban landscapes, studying the feasibility of incorporating pest prevention into building codes, such as the California Green Building Standards Code, incentivizing sustainable landscape design and renovation, requiring state-owned and state-leased buildings to have sustainable pest management plans, and reducing pest pressures by addressing conducive conditions through regulations by other state agencies and local agencies in housing codes, nuisance codes, and others. So that wraps up my overview of the roadmap, and I'm very excited to turn over the presentation to three members from the work group representing our urban subgroup to offer their perspective on participating in the work group and how they see the roadmap moving forward. And first, I'd like to introduce Darren Van Steenwyk from Clark Pest Control.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate the introduction. I also appreciate the summary of the roadmap. You did a great job kind of laying out the major goals and and the North Star that we all wanted to move to. One of the interesting things that we all kind of participated in as members of this group was we all recognize that we all want to get to the same place. That we all want to protect the lives and the property of the citizens of California. There may be kind of, as Julie said, some difference in how we kind of get there, but knowing that is that underpinning is something that us as a wide variety of people with many different voices was very interesting as a participant in this group. There is a lot of different types of pests in non-ag settings, whether it is a forest, whether it is a right-of-way, whether it is an urban setting, that we all have to pay attention to, and that we all have to really kind of give its due. And that's one thing I appreciate about this group is that it, as Julie said, it gave urban its due. There is a lot of pesticides that are used by both licensed and then non-licensed or unlicensed individuals, whether it is trained or not. There's a lot of pesticides that are purchased and applied in this state. And something that I appreciate that this roadmap really kind of focuses on or emphasizes in multiple different ways is education and is knowledge. And I say that because this group, because this roadmap wants to build on the current knowledge that's there, that's existing, whether it is certain IPM standards that SPM builds off of, but it also wants to obtain new knowledge. It wants to build on that. It wants to learn what other ways we can control pests. And this roadmap really kind of lays the foundation for California to move forward and to be a leader in the nation, to be able to gain that new knowledge, because our industry is a very big supporter of education, and the more information you have, the more well informed you are. Ideally, the better decision you can make in whatever form or fashion, and especially when it comes to controlling pests in your home, in your restaurant, in whatever setting that you happen to live or operate. Another thing that I also appreciate about this document is that it's meant to be holistic, that it is a complete package, that just pulling one individual aspect of this document isn't going to make nearly the impact that implementing the entire roadmap can, because seeing that the roadmap as a whole really is going to get us to where we as a state want to get to, which is again continuing to protect the lives and property of the citizens of this state. But we can't just cherry pick from this document, and we can't just take a look at it and pull out the individual aspects that we want and ignore the other parts. And again, one of the things that I know that we're all excited about is this document talking about prevention. And we all know an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's what this document is really about. When it comes to moving forward and how we think that we can prioritize, or how we think that we can implement this document, is that there's going to be a lot of investment in various types of infrastructure. And whether the infrastructure is in research, whether that research is in our local, our state universities, whether that research is in our state agencies, but the research will also be in the private sector, in industry, in the manufacturers, in the registrants, and that research will help not only gain new knowledge that we all want, but it will help us innovate and help us kind of move forward in this process. Another thing that I believe that we that we want to happen for this is investment in the infrastructure of DPR. One of the many things that DPR will be asked to do, and she and Julie mentioned this, was the evaluate the registration process and the current evaluation process for current products, because we all recognize that we can't just remove products or limit certain products without alternatives, because those products fill a niche, those products have a use, and we have to make sure that those uses are still filled, and those niches are still filled. And so one of the things that we want to do is again invest heavily in DPR in this registration process. We know that it is going to be a big ask. We know that this is something that DPR has a lot of investment in already, but to revamp some of that is something that we would like to do. But also, one of the aspects of the ask is that product registrants, product developers, and practitioners such as myself embrace many of these new technologies and embrace this new information that hopefully we're able to go out and gain to better control the pests in this state. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in, and participate in this, in the development of this document. We'll pass it back to Julie.
Darren, thanks so much for sharing your perspective and for all of the time you committed to the development of the roadmap. And next, I'd like to introduce Carrie Winbiel from UC's Integrated Pest Management Program.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I echo a lot of Darren's comments about, the experience of being a part of this roadmap development, and a lot of his comments about what we are excited about and what we see as important moving forward. So to reiterate some of what both Darren and Julie have said is, the focus and the elevation of urban pest and pesticide issues was really important in my perspective in being a part of this group, because we do have a lot of pest management around our homes, gardens, landscapes, and non-commercial areas. And with the majority of California's population of nearly 40 million people living in urbanized and suburban areas, we do need to focus on some of the pests that we contend with just around our homes, whether it's the landscape or in the house, cockroaches, rats, mosquitoes, things that we may not consider because they're not in agriculture, but they may be in our homes. And everyone experiences a pest problem. And so what we do about it and the tools that we have available to make sure we're managing the pest, but also keeping ourselves safe and healthy. And so these public health pests of concern are very important to address. We do have a lot of licensed pesticide applicators in the urban realm, but we do have even more who have not been trained, who have not been licensed to apply pesticides, yet we have many products available on the consumer market, and there's not always training that goes along with their use. And so we want to make sure that we are partnering in the knowledge development as well as outreach and education to make sure any users of pesticides are going to use them safely so that we don't have problems with our health or the environment. And that may be changing from one pesticide to a different one, but in integrated pest management, as we always talk about, there are other tools that are non-chemical that we can use. And so the difference between integrated pest management and sustainable pest management isn't really that vast. And as Julie laid out earlier, there are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of things that we've been doing and been thinking about for years, but how can we bring it all together so that we are having a more holistic and broader view of how we are managing pests in our environments, whether it's in our homes, our schools, agriculture, our landscapes. So, as a member of the University of California, I'm very pleased to see suggestions that there should be increased funding for research because my colleagues and I find it difficult to find sources of funding to conduct research on the biology and the management of various urban pests, and then extending that to our many different audiences. And so that is something I'm excited about as part of this. But as already mentioned, the pesticide use suggestions that we want to have more information and better data so that we can know what kind of pesticide sales are out there, and reaching out to various audiences that might be a part of pesticide use and sales is going to help us understand patterns and ways to share education with the different groups who are involved in pesticide use in our environment to protect our environment. But really one thing about this roadmap and the process is bringing all the different voices together and having these great discussions about what the concerns are, as well as how we can address them. And so I really look forward to the partnerships that will be developed or that have been developed, and collaborating with the agencies and organizations, universities, different trade groups, and other professionals and residents to see how we can make the roadmap goals a reality and really benefit California as a whole. So I'm excited to be a part of it. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks very much, Carrie. Really appreciate you being here and for being a part of the work group. And now we'll turn it over to Chris Geiger, former director of the San Francisco Department of the Environment.
Technically the manager of the IPM program, but that's okay. Thanks,
Sorry
Julie.
about that, Chris. Thanks for the clarification. I want to promote you in your retirement.
Thanks, Julie. And, Darren and Carrie and Julie laid it all out for you pretty much, and I don't want to repeat myself. I will say that, so I'm going to just tell you kind of what I'm most excited about and what I'm hopeful for in this plan, in this roadmap. And it's worth pointing out that, yes, it was a wonderful example of a stakeholder process, but it wasn't without pain. I mean, this was 21 months of discussions, and it was relatively easy, as others have pointed out, to come to the agreement on what our goals are, but the how to do it is always the sticker. And that became grueling at times, but when we were able to come to an agreement on certain things, it was especially exciting. It was very exciting to be able to do that. And that's what I love about these kinds of processes. So what I'm excited about, really, after working for about 20 years in urban pest management and some before that in agricultural, is, as others have said, the attention to urban issues has been giving short shrift. People don't really realize, I think, that it was 35 to 55% of all pesticide sales were for non-agricultural uses, or that 65 to 75% of all reported pesticide illnesses are from non-agricultural uses. So it's significant, and I'm happy that we are, shifting our focus a little bit towards the urban. Most of us live in cities. And just what that means on the ground, you can think of the fact that compared to agriculture, especially, you do have a lot more untrained and unlicensed users of pesticides for many of these urban uses that we're talking about. And they may be people, they have good intentions, they want to do the right thing, but it is, this is, for example, this is your neighbor who has a rat problem, tossing rat bait in the backyard and thinking that he is solving that problem, when he may actually be causing some wildlife impacts on hawks and owls, when he maybe would have been better off screening out some of the holes in his house that are letting them in, or using some other techniques. Or it might be apartment managers under pressure with low budget, having major pest problems in multi-unit apartment buildings, and recommending bug bombs for bed bugs. And we've seen this in some of the affordable housing developments we've worked at. Bug bombs do not work for bed bugs. That's a scientific fact, and they are a hazard. They really don't work for much, as a matter of fact. It could be the same manager who really doesn't know how to contract for IPM services very well. Maybe he's just doing the lowest bidder, he or she. So there are a lot of examples of critical needs in the urban sector, because that apartment manager is affecting the lives of thousands of people, the indoor air quality in the building. And also all of that stuff is draining into rivers and estuaries. And we haven't done a good enough job of tracking what's really going on there, from pesticides draining off of pavement, for example. We've been finding some bad things. So really happy that we're getting attention to urban non-agricultural issues. I'm especially happy with the attention to prevention. This has been sort of one of my personal campaigns over many years. And what I mean by prevention, in addition to, preventing the bad pests from coming into the state in the first place, or, interdiction, I'm talking about prevention in buildings and landscapes. We have seen so many situations where simple acts like plugging up holes or eliminating hiding places could have dramatically improved the pest management in that building and improved public health. Simple stuff, not rocket science. There were examples, sealing gaps under kitchen cabinets where mice and roaches live. Not a difficult task, cheap, but affects many thousands of people in some of these developments, and not doing it results in a lot more pesticide use and also more pests. We ran into one situation where there was an extensive field of English ivy planted next to a hospital. English ivy just happens to be a place that rats love to live. And that's kind of an invitation for rats to get into a healthcare facility, and they can cause some real problems there. We've had problems in affordable housing where a sewer lateral problem, a breakage in a sewer lateral resulted in rats really overrunning the whole development, literally chewing through walls. Putting out baits would not help here. Putting out traps would not help here. We needed to pay attention to prevention. And so this needs to be more a part of what we do as a society, even though there is no glory whatsoever in prevention. You will never make headlines by preventing anything because you won't know what didn't happen. But for pest management, this is really a fundamental component of integrated pest management, sustainable pest management. And there are connections to be made here with better trainings, and better research, of course, as Carrie mentioned, better trainings for targeted groups who have to take care of big facilities, for example, the big apartment buildings, better trainings, better design and retrofits for buildings, so better guidelines on that, and possibly building codes to make sure this all happens. There is, so that's prevention. I'm happy about that, happy about urban, and I'm especially happy about this whole prioritization mechanism that's being set up. I hope will be set up thanks to the roadmap. This is not just a bureaucratic exercise if it goes well. It's meant to be a problem-solving mechanism affecting people on the ground who are most affected by the problem. And problem may be an especially risky pesticide use or a pest that we don't have good alternatives for, alternative control methods. But the intention here is to prioritize on a broad scale urban and agricultural issues, research the science behind it, look at what it means on the ground to do various alternatives for that pest, and then use those priorities to help drive things like grant programs, grant priorities, research priorities, registration, as Julie mentioned. It could be sort of a centerpiece for how we progress in this field. So what I'm really hopeful about here, and it was hopeful just working with this group. It was a wonderful group of people, and we ended up learning how to work as a team and put aside differences. But I'm really hopeful that this will not be a report on a shelf. This is something that happens a lot, unfortunately. And what gives me hope that that will not happen is that we have had really great engagement from the agencies involved, and especially DPR and Julie and Karen were there in all the meetings and in the trenches, trying to help us work through some of these difficult questions. And I look forward to this being funded as it needs to be funded, and to keep that momentum going, to make this something that's a real improvement in how we manage pests in the state. And I just want to thank the DPR and CalAPA directors again, and the work group members again for having the chance to participate in this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us tonight, and also for being with us throughout that 21-month process. So just quickly want to talk about next steps. So the roadmap calls for the state by 2025 to develop a plan, funding mechanisms, and programs to prioritize pesticides for reduction and to support the practice change necessary to transition away from the use of high-risk pesticides in both agricultural and non-agricultural settings. As we've talked about, no one recommendation or leverage point in this roadmap will on its own bring about the systemic change that we think is really critical for sustainable pest management to be implemented at a system-wide level. To meet the 2050 goals, the full breadth of the roadmap has to be implemented. And the roadmap recommendations can only be effectively implemented if the entire system is working together to create the conditions necessary for these outcomes to be realized. So we really hope that all of you will be part of this process and journey with us as we move forward to a sustainable future. And so I am just going to pull up on the screen just a reminder of the resources. The roadmap is available on the Department of Pesticide Regulation website. And our public comment period, as Karen noted at the top, is running through 5 p.m. on March 13th. And so I will now turn it over to, one more thing. Sorry about that. Want to note that we've got upcoming webinars that are going to be focused on agricultural pest management on Thursday this week, March 2nd. The one in the morning is at 10 a.m. and the one in the evening is at 5:30. And again, these are posted on our website as well. And now I will turn it over to Leah, because I think we have time for a few questions.
Thanks, Julie. And I did want to mention one question that came in. We will be posting a recording of these webinars on our website, so you can view the recordings of the webinars there for both today's webinars and Thursday's webinars focused on the agricultural industry. Okay, Julie, here's one of the questions that came in, and this was mentioned briefly by Chris, but how will the recommendations in the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap be funded?
A great question. And just want to note that this too is part of what I was just mentioning in terms of next steps, and what the roadmap envisioned is that the key initial focus would really be identifying what funding needs are represented by the roadmap recommendations. And so part of what we're looking for in having the public comment period that's open now is to get some input on what actions really are foundational and should come first, as well as where that funding should be. And so we're going to be in the process of compiling all of that input, talking to our sister agencies and identifying what short-term and long-term funding needs are, and then making the case to the legislature for that funding. And I'll just note that the funding needs obviously are not limited just to the Department of Pesticide Regulation. They also extend to CDFA and CalAPA, as well as UC, CSU, the community colleges, and our local partners. And so really looking comprehensively at what funding needs are necessary over the very long term to get to the 2050 goals.
Thanks, Julie. And one other question, kind of want to dig a little bit more into the priority pesticides. A question about if you can provide some examples, or how that process is going to run so that there are effective and affordable alternatives for growers.
Thanks, Leah. So what the process envisions, and I'll just say at the top that we don't currently have a list of the priority pesticides. What's really envisioned in the roadmap is that we at DPR convene and pull together this committee of external stakeholders to provide guidance and expertise on the current health risks and environmental risks associated with pesticides that do pose the greatest risks, as well as people who have knowledge and experience with potential alternatives, whether those are tools or practices like cover cropping or new technologies, precision applications, looking for a real breadth of expertise to help guide input to our decision-making on what pesticides should be identified as priorities. So really a process to come. But I do want to note, as I did at the top, that we do at DPR have an ongoing practice of evaluating pesticides for risks prior to registration, as well as reevaluating and evaluating pesticides following their registration. This priority pesticide process is really looking at a much more comprehensive approach to ensure that at a state level, we're using and really prioritizing state resources so that we're targeting the pesticides that pose the greatest risks.
Thanks, Julie. One additional question that came in. So the 2050 goals are a long way out. So what are some of the priorities or interim goals that we're considering in the meantime?
Great. So one of the ones that I just noted is working to develop a plan and identify resources to implement the roadmap. So really having the roadmap is very comprehensive. It's a very long document, and the work group took it so far, and now part of our job and the job of our sister agencies is to really, with public input, I really develop an implementation plan for the roadmap. There are other short-term goals for, as I noted throughout the roadmap, of focusing on both investing in knowledge creation and development and outreach, so that we are really actively working on both identifying and developing alternatives and practices, and also sharing knowledge about those practices, both in agricultural and urban settings. And then again, sprinkled throughout the roadmap, there are nearer term goals that will help support getting to the 2050 goals.
Thanks, Julie. I know we're at time today, so I did want to mention again that a recording of this webinar will be available on our website, and that we're digging more into the agricultural specific recommendations at both of the webinars on Thursday. Hope you can join us there.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, everyone.